This episode of the Multiamory podcast is brought to you by Quip, modern oral care delivered. For $10 off your first refill, go to tryquip.com/multiamory.
Monogamy is a hell of a hierarchy. There can be only one is one freaking hell of a hierarchy right there. And it's not just in the relationship escalator that you only have one partner. It is that relationship is intrinsically supposed to outweigh almost every other a non-care-based relationship that you have.
If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
if you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
But if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
And this is the Multiamory podcast.
Songs I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking with Amy Gahran, a.k.a. Aggie Sez. Amy is a longtime journalist and the author of the book Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator, Uncommon Love and Life. Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator is a research-based exploration of the social norms for how most people assume intimate relationships are supposed to work, as well as the many ways that people are stepping off the escalator to live and love on their own terms. Amy also identifies as solo poly, and for several years she wrote solopoly.net under the name Aggie Sez. So in case you were curious about, wait, I thought, what? They are the same person, one and the same, Amy Gahran and Aggie Sez. And she also created and for several years was the moderator of the largest solo polyamory Facebook group online. And we had a really fun time talking with her about all this stuff. We got pretty deep into some philosophical things as well as some sort of economic things and all sorts of stuff. So I'm excited to share this interview with all of you.
I appreciate her outspokenness.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally. And her years of experience looking into all of this and researching it is awesome. So with that, let's get to the interview. All right, Amy, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, glad to be here. I've been a fan of the show for quite a while. It's nice to finally talk to y'all.
Well, we've been a fan of yours
Thank you
too.
so much.
Jeez.
Awesome.
And for our listeners out there who may just be coming to the show initially and not know what the concept of the relationship escalator is, can we just talk about that a little bit? What does that mean to you, and why is it important to step off of it?
Thanks. That's a really great question, actually. The whole reason I did this particular book this way is to kind of meet the need of, yo, fish, there's this thing called water, you might want to think about it. And because social norms, the reason why we have any social norms is that they exist as a kind of grammar for how people interact, so you don't have to think so hard from scratch with every interaction that you have. And it takes a lot of the friction out of any kind of interpersonal interaction. And some social norms get really multi-layered and involved and laden with lots of meaning. And they kind of, congeal into these lumps, if you will, of social meaning. And one of those lumps of social meaning is around relationships that involve significant emotional or physical intimacy. And to the extent that relationships that follow this, certain package of norms are what is defined as a relationship. A lot of times when you say that little code phrase, a relationship, everybody knows what it means. And there's all this built-in infrastructure for how you talk about it and how you're supposed to interact with these people and what that's supposed to mean with society and housing and finances and all sorts of things. So it really is, the relationship escalator is the bundle of norms for how sexually or emotionally intimate relationships are supposed to happen between adults. And it includes things such as they're supposed to be monogamous, sexually and romantically exclusive between two and only two people. They are supposed to involve significant life entwinement. Usually that means living together, but also merging identity. Often when people start to think of themselves as a couple, that means they merge their identity to a certain extent. And that it's supposed to be always and forever. So, really the only way that you know if you've done a relationship right is when somebody dies. There are all these implicit aspects, and it's called the relationship escalator because everybody's supposed to know that there are a certain set of progressive steps that lead up to this goal of a permanently exclusive, cohabitating, socially venerated relationship. And that starts with, you meet someone, you think they're hot, you start dating, you start having sex, you fall in love, you stop dating other people, you move in together, and then marriage, kids, death do you part. And it feels like an escalator because of this background of social norms. Everybody knows it's supposed to work, so it seems simpler. It seems like it has its own momentum, and that's because it is so familiar and socially reinforced. It's not the only way relationships work, but it can seem a lot more natural and easier because it's what we've all grown up soaking in, marinating in, that this is the way it's supposed to work. It can be very difficult to conceive of relationships differently for a lot of people, and it can be daunting to try to do relationships differently because you're not only fighting all this external norms and expectations and forces, but all the norms and expectations that exist inside your head. The hardest conditioning to undo is not what's outside of you, but what's inside of you. So that's why it's the relationship escalator and not the relationship staircase. It can feel like you're getting carried along.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we're so used to, in movies and TV and in books and even in our own lives, I think we're so used to encountering, that conversation where it's, where's this relationship going?
Yeah,
what is it we're doing? What are we? Kind of implying like we got to get on this escalator, right? And if we're not on the escalator, then where are we going? What are we doing? Because there's only one direction for us to be going.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And it's interesting because a lot of people just do it automatically, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. The escalator is a great choice. It works really, really well for not lots of people, but it is an option. And it helps when choosing something that's so valuable to most people's lives to know what your options are and to be making these decisions consciously. That tends to yield better relationships, even for people who consider themselves strictly monogamous. And that's a big reason why I did this book, is to let people know you got options, and here's what those options look like from the experience of the people who are doing them. I have 1,500 co-authors. I did a survey. I'm a journalist, and my background is, all right, I want to do something, I'll ask a bunch of people about it. So I did a survey about unconventional relationships, and a total of 1,500 people responded. I was absolutely floored by that response, especially because people were writing the equivalent of about 2,000, 2,500 word essays in their surveys.
Wow.
I learned a lot about parsing qualitative data, let me tell you.
I'd imagine.
But it was worthwhile. And over 300 people are quoted in this book. And I've got 2 other books coming out because everything on the cutting room floor is my factory floor. So I'm going to be using everything.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, you mentioned specifically about, also introducing this to people who are strictly monogamous. And I think that's a great segue for Jase, for you to share your story with that.
Yeah, exactly. So something that, we've talked about the relationship escalator a lot on this show, and just that concept of kind of realizing, becoming aware that this is a thing we do and that it isn't just a natural thing that happens all by itself, that it is a choice we make. We just kind of take it for granted. That's, it's been hugely helpful, I think, in all of our lives, in kind of realizing this. When we were first introduced to the concept, maybe a few years ago, is when I first started coming across this online. And you mentioned that about writing this book so that it's a resource for monogamous people as well. And I wanted to bring that up, not so much just as a question all by itself, but something that I would love us to keep in mind as we have this discussion today. And that's that a lot of the resources out there about the relationship escalator are all, if they're not specifically about polyamory or some kind of non-monogamy, they're sort of surrounded by it, right? They're on those types of blogs or, on podcasts like ours. But I did just want to mention that because I think that's such a useful thing to have a resource out there for monogamous people to be aware of this. And I think your book's a great example of that. And I'd also love for this episode to be a place where people could start as a way to get their feet wet, and then they could move on to reading your book and looking for other blog posts. Because I had an experience a couple years ago of talking to my brother, who was trying to make a difficult decision about moving in with his girlfriend versus not, and kind of what their financial situations were, and that it couldn't be temporary and all of these things. And I told him about the relationship escalator, and he thought that was really interesting. He's like, wow, I'd never thought about that. That's cool. Do you know of any resources for it? And I was like, yeah, just like Google it and look it up. There's definitely some good posts out there and blogs. And he came back a week later saying, yeah, I tried looking that up, but all of the blogs were polyamory blogs and had a lot of that talk in them. And I didn't feel like that was something I could bring to my monogamous girlfriend and have her feel comfortable with me bringing this resource to her. So anyway, I do really appreciate your book for trying to, fill in some of that gap as well. And I hope that we can all work together to get even more of that.
You're hitting on a very important point there. Stigma. And, there are a number of hallmarks that establish what an escalator relationship is. And definitely the 800-pound gorilla is monogamy. There is so much stigma in this society against any relationships that don't involve monogamy, and that there are a variety of reasons for that. But what if it was a blog for people who prefer to not live with partners, regardless of the types of relationships they have? Do you think your brother might have had that same reaction?
Probably not as much.
Yeah, because the idea of not necessarily living with a partner is not nearly as stigmatized, at least in Western societies, as much as non-monogamy is. Just non-monogamy, as much as consensual non-monogamy is. Because non-consensual non-monogamy is extremely conventional. If somebody hears that somebody's cheating, they may be hurt, they may be appalled, whatever. They won't be confused. They'll know what's going on. Consensual non-monogamy, it's like taking the force of gravity away. People just don't know how that'll function, and it scares the shit out of people. So that's why I wanted to start in less scary territory, to kind of do the whole, yo fish, there's this thing called water, and explain the concept of the relationship escalator. But it's odd. It's kind of stigma to that, too. I found that some people react really negatively to the concept that there is an escalator, because they're like, well, that's just relationships, right? And other things, they're not really relationships, right? It's like, okay, let's think about that, shall we?
Right.
But no, that argument that you talk about, that's exactly why I did it. I used to do a blog called solopoly.net about being solo polyamorous. And I had a post on there called Riding the Relationship Escalator or Not. And when I put that, just because I was doing so many definitional things in this blog, and I kept saying this relationship escalator thing, it's like, well, I should explain what I'm talking about, right? So I wrote up a post about it. Wham! I have never gotten so much traffic to anything in my life, and it was being linked to all over the place, including from a lot of mainstream media, for academic publications, the regular relationship, like, quote unquote normal relationship blogs and podcasts. And the traffic was, I'm looking at that, being a self-employed journalist, I'm like, that looks like a market opportunity. And it turns out it has been, because there aren't a lot of publications addressing a mainstream audience that show people that they have options, and not just non-monogamy. My book covers a whole lot of options. There are lots of ways that people step off that escalator, but definitely consensual non-monogamy, that's the part that freaks people out.
Right. Yeah. Right, definitely. Well, I think that's actually a good transition within, under the umbrella term of consensual non-monogamy, I wanted to talk to you specifically more about solo polyamory. And you did mention how, you wrote, the blog solopoly.net for so long. And I feel like my perception of, when I tap into the online polyamory space and into communities, I feel like solo polyamory often comes up as a topic of discussion of people kind of arguing about what it actually means, who actually is solo poly. Am I solo poly enough? Are you not solo poly? Am I going to try to do some gatekeeping on whether you're solo poly or not? Things like that. So I'm going to start out by including a quote from your book where you said, "Solohood does not hinge upon relationship status." And then to skip ahead a little bit further, you say that it needs not preclude consideration of others, making commitments to others, or putting others first in certain situations. So I really like that you bring that foundation to it. And I know, Tristan Taormino, who wrote Opening Up, I think, she claims that she created the term solo polyamory. I haven't fact checked whether that's true or not. And she kind of uses the definition that it's just polyamory for people who aren't looking for a primary, which I think personally is a little bit reductive. And I think there's a lot of nuance that gets lost in there. So could you fill in for our listeners, what's your personal definition of solo polyamory and what that means to you?
Yeah, there are a lot of definitions, and I'm not trying to tell anybody else whether they do or don't fall into this. I'm not trying to take away anybody's solo poly card, basically. But I do think there's important considerations. So for me, being solo poly means I choose to not combine the infrastructure of my life with any intimate partners. I don't live with partners. I don't share finances with them. I have a housemate. He's great, but he's a housemate. For me, a big reason for that is I need my own mental and emotional space, and also I make better decisions in relationships when I'm not worrying about whether my housing, my finances, or my sense of identity would fall apart if that relationship were to end. I've been there. I was married for a long time, and when I got divorced, even though it was like the easiest and most amicable divorce ever, man, that was wrenching. It tore my whole life apart, and it took me a few years to put that back together. I operate better, this way, even if I were choosing to be monogamous, which I kind of suck at, so I won't. But here's the thing, though, that is an important thing to consider. There are some people who say, well, I value my autonomy and I don't hinge my identity on my partner, and we operate fairly independently, and we may even not practice hierarchy in our relationships. So that means I'm solo poly. It's like, it could mean that, but there's an important difference. And it comes back to those social norms. There's this thing called couple privilege. And that means that people who appear to be in an escalator-style relationship, even if they are not checking all those escalator boxes, but especially cohabiting, it seems to be the big one, will accrue social couple privilege. People will treat them in ways that often reflect a higher status of, respectability, recognition, etc. And there are factors that can mitigate that, but it definitely means that people who choose not to nest with their partners face a very different logistical and dating and social playing field than people who do. And I'm not saying that's fair. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. And I'm not saying that people who are nesting can't be solo poly, but I am saying they face a very different set of circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great point to bring up. And I feel like just that idea of cohabiting or not is a pretty wide divide. And it's interesting because for Dedeker and myself, we both tend to identify as solo poly, but live together for part of the year sometimes. And other times we'll be in different countries from each other for months at a time. So it's interesting seeing the difference between how people treat me during times when I'm living with her and when I'm not, especially if it's someone new that I've met who doesn't know the situation yet. So yeah, it's definitely true that there is.
What kind of differences do you see?
Okay. One thing is I would say even if they're people who are somewhat aware of non-monogamy or polyamory, if I'm living together, it's always assumed that we have a hierarchy and that she's primary and that there's probably some other stipulations and rules and things that go along with that.
Exactly.
That's definitely a big one. But for people who are not, I mean, there's for people who are more sort of traditionally monogamously minded, the fact that we're living together comes with it the assumption that we're going to want to have kids and that we want to get married.
There's that escalator.
Yeah. I get that one a lot. Even in like negotiating a contract at my current job, like that came up because they knew about her and that she and I had been traveling together, of kind of like, well, thinking they could use that as a bargaining chip against me, of like, well, you know, you're going to want some stability in this position because of, you know, when you have kids. And
you didn't tell me that.
And I had to be like,
that's real. Sorry, that just strikes me as really funny that they're using me as the bargaining chip to get you to stay in one place.
Yeah.
That is the bad move on their part.
This is not the first time I've heard that.
Jokes on them.
yeah, really. Yeah.
Really?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jase, are you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of wanted to jump in on that. Because I feel like to talk about the other side of it is that the times when I'm not living with Jase, because I also, like, sometimes I live with other partners during the year, but sometimes I'm also by myself, like I am right now. That it's really funny to me how quickly people will go to, if it's someone new, like people will go to assuming that, you know, if I'm not living with a partner, then must mean the relationship's not that serious, or could be kind of disregarded. Or people will go to like, is everything okay with you and Jase? Like, you're not living together anymore. Is everything okay? Are you okay? Like, what's going on? You can talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, we're okay, whatever. This is only like the 6th time that we've moved in together and then moved out together, like in the past 2 years, like whatever, it's fine, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that change definitely comes up.
It's a very weighty benchmark, and that's why being solo poly is a twofer on freaking people out, because it hits on the two biggest and heaviest hallmarks of escalator relationships: monogamy, the exclusivity, and merging. And so I freak a lot of people out, but I'm used to that.
So you, Jase mentioned a little bit about hierarchy. Amy, you mentioned hierarchy a little bit too. On this show, we've talked a lot about specifically the ethics of hierarchy and of rules and of power imbalances in relationships. We generally tend to take a fairly anti-prescriptive hierarchy stance on this show, and really encourage people to, again, always be examining the ethics and the power dynamics of anything that they're taking part in their relationships and how that plays out for everyone else that they're connected to in their lives. So, however, in my coaching practice, when I work with clients, you know, I get a lot of clients who maybe have listened to the show a lot. They've done a lot of reading up on polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, and they want to be egalitarian, but they find it difficult because they're opening up their relationship with their, you know, spouse and co-parent of 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And I was wondering, do you have practical tips for people who are in these kind of long established relationships who want to kind of like de-primary or de-hierarchy without abandoning or downgrading their standing relationship?
Oh, that's a great question. You really opened up a can of worms there. Okay. So, first of all, hierarchy is not just about non-monogamy. It is a social norm that is very much a part of the relationship escalator. I mean, one of the great things about doing this research and asking people about what makes their relationship unconventional is that you get kind of the flip side of that, to see what exactly those conventions are. Where are the lines that people step around? And when you think about it, monogamy is a hell of a hierarchy. There can be only one is one freaking hell of a hierarchy right there. And it's not just in the relationship escalator that you only have one partner. It is that relationship is intrinsically supposed to outweigh almost every other a non-care-based relationship that you have. So, friends, other adult family members, things like that. In most Western cultures, at least, your escalator partner is supposed to be the one that takes the cake above all of them. And that makes for some sticky situations. Like, what if you're in a monogamous relationship, but you have a very close friend that you have commitments to, and you decide that you want to live with your friend for a couple of years? Most people would think, what's wrong with you? But, that would be a choice that would be a valid choice if you did not consider hierarchy to be a crucial part of your relationship. Now, so that's putting it in the frame of that's something that everybody could relate to. Now, in the context of polyamory, you also have sexually and or romantically intimate relationships. There's that issue of you mentioned descriptive hierarchy. I actually quibble with that term quite a bit because it seems to me that that's a term, and I talk to people a lot about this, that means a lot more for people who would be on top of the hierarchy than in other positions. Somebody who's not necessarily on top of the hierarchy might experience exactly the same constraints, limitations, effects as somebody in a prescriptive hierarchy. So I think that differentiation is debatable.
I do love, I just wanted to hop in just to say, I do love that something you did point out from your research is that usually the people who are arguing for hierarchy or arguing about its benefits are the people who are benefiting from it. So usually usually it's the primary partner who's the one who's talking about how hierarchy is a really helpful, useful thing.
But benefit is an important point because there are many people, including many solo poly people, who are fine with hierarchy, who are fine with saying, hey, I like being a secondary partner. I like not having this level of responsibility or expectations. It works great for them. Totally cool. All of this stuff is optional. But the issue with the ethics is it okay for somebody to effectively control a relationship in which they are not a partner? That's a core consideration, and there are a variety of perspectives on that. Also an issue with hierarchy is how accurately and fully people disclose their hierarchy and how it can affect people. There's this thing called sneakyarchy, and it happens a lot. I've got the tire tracks all over my back here from it. Some of you might have it as well. Sneakyarchy is when people don't necessarily disclose or realize how hierarchical they are, how they practice hierarchy, when and how it might kick in, and how it might affect other people. And it can sneak up on anybody. A lot of people, especially people who are poly, prefer to think that they are far more egalitarian than they might actually be. And especially when people are new to polyamory and they are used to having so much weight and meaning on this escalator relationship. And it's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that, all right, I'm not on this escalator anymore, but maybe really because holding onto the handrails of the escalator make me feel safe. But no, I'm not there. There's a lot of tension, and you've probably seen people really wrestling with that. And it can take a lot of time and especially a lot of experience to figure out where you are on the hierarchy spectrum. Hierarchy is not necessarily intrinsically unethical, but it does require consent, which means it requires disclosure, and which means it requires negotiation. And if you're not having very clear conversations about hierarchy, especially if you're coming from a position that has that 800-pound gorilla of the relationship escalator on your back and in your head and in everybody else's head, it can be really hard to undo it. So some ways that people undo that is to make sure that they have frequent discussions about, are we, even there, the we word, a lot of people go, we. Am I allowing any forces other than what my partner and I want to do affect our relationship? Of course, there are going to be some ripple effects. It's never. We don't live in vacuums. But if you say, we don't do hierarchy, but I'm just going to check in with my partner about this to see if they're okay with what I'm doing with you, maybe that's hierarchy, maybe it's not. I actually started making some sneakyarchy bingo cards because there are things that are not necessarily unethical or problematic individually, but if a pattern of them accumulates over time, if you check off enough things on the bingo card, yeah, there might be some sneaky-archy happening there. And
can you give us some examples of stuff that's on that bingo card?
oh, well, that one of them was I just need to check in with my partner about that's one, or we have a boundary that, you know, or just in capital letters, we, you know, that's, if you hear that a lot rather than, and if you know that you're not part of that we, yeah.
Right.
So it's hierarchy. All I can say is declare your intention that you want your relationships to be able to grow and develop and find their own level without necessarily being constrained by other existing relationships, and do your best to try to find an equilibrium and be fair to people the best you can, and be honest with people, and accept that you're going to fuck it up. And you're going to hurt people, and other people are going to hurt you, and just keep getting back up and say, I learned from that. Let me try to do this better. Because these social norms are deep. And I have never seen, I've been poly for a friggin' long time. Okay. I mean, all my life for the last 25 years, however you want to count. And I've never seen anybody pull that off. Coming from an existing escalator relationship, I've never seen them pull it off perfectly from the bat. So you're gonna fuck it up, and just declare your intention and tell people you're dealing with, I'm gonna fuck this up somehow. Please call me on that, and accept it when they do. And also don't expect that it is okay to suddenly implement hierarchy as soon as somebody gets insecure.
Right.
If you need to change the terms of the relationship, own it, but expect that if you were talking the talk of being not hierarchical, and then all of a sudden it comes crashing down, people are going to be upset, and they have a right to be upset, because they had a right to consent to the kind of relationship that they're in.
Right.
Does that help?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Very much.
It's a place to start from.
Okay.
It's a place to start from, for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting that theme of kind of accepting that you're going to fuck it up comes up, because just a few episodes ago, we had Andrew Gurza on the show to talk about sex and dating people with disabilities. And he said almost exactly the same thing, of like, when he goes into any kind of sexual encounter with someone, is just like starting from the premise of like, I know you're going to fuck up somehow, and you're going to say something that's going to be offensive. Let's just understand that's going to happen, and we'll get through it. So that is really interesting.
Yeah, and it helps to kind of let partners know that you don't quite know what you're doing yet. And until you have a fair amount of experience, you won't. Because especially if they're new to polyamory and you're new to polyamory, they might defer to you because of couple privilege. Because they think, oh, well, that's how polyamory works, right? It's couple plus something, and I should pay attention to them and take my cues off of them, and because they know what they're doing. Not necessarily.
Before we get back to our interview with Amy, we wanted to take a quick break to talk about some ways that you can help us to keep doing this show and to keep growing this community and spreading the word about all of these things, to hopefully make everyone's relationships out there a little bit better. And the first and best way that you could possibly do that is to become one of our supporters on Patreon. On patreon.com, you can pledge a certain amount of money every month to help us keep this show going. And as a thank you for that, we have various rewards at different levels. At the $5 level, you get an invite to our private, invite-only, closed Facebook group that no one can see anything about unless they're in the group. It's an amazing place for getting to share your stories, get advice from people who've gone through the same things that you are, in a place where you don't have to worry about, your coworkers who don't understand that you're questioning some of the society norms, right? We were talking earlier with Amy about how threatening some of these things are to people, and it's really cool to have a space where you can have those sorts of conversations, and you don't have to first start by explaining, hey, I do things a little different, whatever that is. It's a group where people get that. At the $7 a month level, we also have ad-free versions of our episode that come out a day early and have extra bonus content in them. At $9 and up, we have a monthly video discussion group that's coming up in a couple weeks here, the next one for this month. They're a really awesome opportunity to get some actual face-to-face, Skype-style video chat with other people to process things, and it's been a really cool, supportive group that I've really enjoyed seeing that grow. And again, that's patreon.com/multiamory.
Another way that you could support our show is to go to multiamory.com/store and buy some of our merchandise. So we have some awesome merch for you out there. We have hoodies, we've got t-shirts, we have cool little notebooks. Oh yeah, here's my notebook. I'm going to show you all. Oh shit, here we go. Here, I've got it right here. It's super awesome. It's got our super polys on it. We've got all of those in addition to pants and various other things. So if you're out there and you want to show off your multiamory spirit, then you can definitely get a merch item. And even if you're not super out, if people don't know necessarily that you're polyamorous, we have merch items that just have our logo on it. So it doesn't say multiamory, it doesn't say polyamory, anything anywhere, but you can still kind of show your multiamory pride. And it becomes kind of a secret code for people saying like, oh, wait a minute, I know that logo. Is that... okay, we're both in the same club here. So yeah, if you want to show off your multiamory pride in any way, go to multiamory.com/store and buy our awesome merch.
All your language around like multiamory spirit and multiamory pride, it just reminds me of high school a little bit. I'm going to multiamory, multiamory high. Oh my God, can we please create like an afternoon TV drama, like high school drama about multiamory high?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be so good. So good. Anyway, sorry, while I get distracted by that. Another way that you can support our show is by just taking a minute to go to iTunes and leave us a review. Every review that we get, we read and often cry happy tears about reading it. Reviews don't just help us, they also help people to find the show in the first place. It helps with our with our SEO, essentially. It helps us show up higher in search results when people are looking for podcasts that talk about things like relationship anarchy or conscious monogamy or polyamory, things like that. So again, it should be very quick. Just go to iTunes and leave us a review.
And then lastly, our sponsor for this episode is Quip. Quip is a company that makes modern oral care, and they deliver it straight to your home. We, all three of us, have our Quip electric toothbrushes that we love. I've had mine now for like a year and a half. I think Emily's had hers about as long. Dedeker just got on the bandwagon recently. And it's awesome. It travels really well. It comes with a way to either mount it on your mirror that also becomes a little travel case. I love it for being able to travel and still have an electric toothbrush that doesn't need an extra charging base or anything like that. Just uses a AAA battery. And it feels so good in my mouth. And they will also send you a refill of the head for the toothbrush, as well as some toothpaste or other supplies. You can kind of customize what your order is going to be. And if you use our promo URL, which is tryquip.com/multiamory, then you will, in addition to being able to get a toothbrush, your first refill will have $10 off, which essentially equals a free refill for your first extra head for your toothbrush. And it's awesome. I highly recommend it. And once again, it's tryquip.com/multiamory. And the best part is they're really not that expensive. If you've looked at a lot of like good electric toothbrushes out there, you're like, I'm not going to spend $200 on a toothbrush. These are way more affordable than that. I've actually considered getting like extra ones for people for Christmas presents or for birthday presents or whatever, because it's like a really nice price point for that type of gifting. So, and if you do that and you use our promo URL, you will also help support our show. And with that, let's get back into it with Amy.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I know that you had a question for us, actually, before this interview even started, about social norms and how they're different between generations.
Well, they evolve. I mean, they're a constantly evolving process. And for instance, monogamy never felt like a great fit to me. And even though I was a child of the 70s, I'm 51 years old, so I'm probably a fair amount older than all of you. But I always found that most of my peers, even while I was growing up, were very monogamy minded. And indeed, I attempted to do monogamy for a long time because I thought that was my only option if I wanted to have a relationship with any depth. And so I was used to being the oddball about that. But I have a lot of friends of all ages, and my local poly community, the Boulder Polyamory Meetup, which is awesome, is mostly people in their 20s and 30s. And it seems like they have fewer expectations of... They've grown up with fewer expectations, not so much of monogamy, but of the other hallmarks that make up the relationship escalator. That you might move in with somebody, but not have it be always and forever, and that you can move apart and have it not be, a relationship ending event. Or that you can have important relationships that kind of come and go in your life, and it doesn't mean that they disappear between the gaps. Or that... an increased understanding and respect for intimacy that is not necessarily sexual or romantic in nature. Asexuality and aromanticism are a thing, and they matter very much. And depths of friendships. I've seen, for non-sexual, non-romantic relationships, I've seen people in their 20s and 30s seem more open to that and willing to invest in that than I have seen among people in my age range. So I was just, like I said, I've always been the oddball. I've never really known what's normal, which is why I actually have to ask people what's normal. What's normal for you guys?
Gosh, who starts? Emily, you want to start?
I guess I would like to think that maybe it's a generational thing, or maybe it's just because the three of us are specifically really steeped in the non-monogamy community, but that the transitions that you've talked about in your book and otherwise can happen between being in a romantic relationship and then going to a more friendship-based relationship, and that can still be a really meaningful and fulfilling type of relationship in one's life. Because I definitely still have friends out there who say, I broke up with that person, I never want to see them again, and I never want to hear from them again. But I mean, the two people in this podcast with me are testament to the fact that I can date someone for a long period of time and not be sexually active with them and still care deeply about them. And I think that is maybe different than it once was. I don't know. Because,
do you think that's accepted by other people, that they accept that you're still close to your former partners?
I mean, I think it is. I don't know. That's a
We're both shaking
point.
our heads.
No,
We're
I know you are.
Like,
I know you are.
The same way that people ask me, like, is everything okay with you and Jase? Like, if we're not living together, like, I still get questions of like, is it really weird to be around Emily? And like, is it and like, oh, you're still recording the podcast? Oh gosh, that must be hard.
Interesting.
No, like, I still get that all the time.
Well, yeah, I know for myself, the most significant relationship of my life is with somebody that I used to be married to, and our relationship got so much better after we got unmarried. He's one of the most valuable people in my life, but everybody, still says, oh, it's so great that you're on good terms with your ex. It's like, I only ex people when I want them out of my life. He's not my ex. Yeah. We used to be married. We're friends, and we're very close friends, and we count on each other for a lot of things. That freaks people out all the time. Even people who have known me for decades still don't freaking get that. It kind of pisses me off.
Well, use that terminology. Just to say like the word ex as opposed to like this person that I care about who is my friend. In context, it means a different thing. I mean, an ex generally has and does mean like they're out of your life 100%, and I don't talk to them anymore. I don't think about them anymore, and obviously, that is not the case, even though that is the case as well. I mean, they are potentially my exes. Yes, that is a true thing, but they're also people who I care about hugely.
And another thing I've noticed that's more norm with my generation that might be less with your generation is, you tell me what you think, acceptance that a relationship that was never sexual or romantic in nature can be very important, and potentially to the point of being a life partner with somebody. A lot of people in my generation have a hard time conceiving of that, and they assume that anything you invest in that kind of relationship will be lost as soon as somebody gets a real relationship. That you can't expect them to actually stick around once they have an intimate partner. And again, not the case. My other core life partner is a woman who's one of my very dearest friends, and we have never been lovers. I'm straight, not for lack of trying, but I'm straight, and she's awesome. But, we take a bullet for each other. And that's not going to change. But what about for you, though? The relationships with people that have never been sexual or romantic, do you think they get as much respect and trust and validation and recognition as non-sexual relationships?
Gosh, I mean,
I'd certainly like to think so.
It is so hard. I think even for the three of us, again, to have a sense of what's normal, because again, all three of us are also so steeped and have been steeped for so many years now also in these alternative communities where a lot of people our same age are talking about these things, like, like the relationship escalator, like the non-sexual, non-romantic people that they have in their life that maybe they want to co-parent with or live with or whatever. So I think I have a hard time getting a sense of whether or not that's the case. I feel like, the places that I get to dip it, kind of step outside of that community and that bubble, as it were, is actually often with my own client base, because I do still get a lot of people who are either in still fairly traditional relationships or hold some traditional values about relationships. I think the thing that stands out most to me for our generation is that, yes, on the one hand, I think we've internalized that it is okay to not jump into the monogamy, marriage, kids track. Like, it is okay to not do that or to delay that or whatever. However, I think rather than embracing the idea that there's so many other options than marriage and monogamy, I think our generation has kind of clung to this idea of like, well, if it's not marriage and monogamy, then the other option is all no strings attached, no emotional connection, keeping it casual, not
a solo
putting any labels on it.
That, yeah.
Exactly, right. That it's like a black and white. It's like a binary.
And that
right?
was a classic error that Tristan Taormino made in her book, where she cast solo poly that way. I think that was a big oversight. It was a great book, but that was an oversight.
Yeah. So I think that's what I see in our generation still is like, yes, we've accepted that like we don't have to be seeking monogamy or seeking marriage or seeking someone to have kids with necessarily, but that means that we have to be constantly keeping everybody out here, like at arm's length. That means we can't, we can't express care for someone, because if we do express care for someone, that's going to mean that they're going to want exclusivity and to get married and to hop on the escalator. So I feel like that's what I see. I like to believe that maybe the next generation after ours will take it a step further and be more willing to embrace, the full variety, the full spectrum of options that are available. But I feel like we're not quite there yet. Jase, you haven't weighed in on this yet.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think that, I think it's so hard when comparing generations to each other, just because it's hard to find anyone who has enough perspective, outside of their own social circles.
We're all kind of a circle of weirdos here. So, yeah.
Right. But I do feel like if I look at my way of analyzing that, rather than just looking at the way that my peers talk, is to look at things like what are the types of relationship models we see in TV programs and in movies that are marketed toward this generation, toward my generation and people even younger than me, and kind of what's hot, what's cool, what are people watching, what's the content of tabloid headlines even, right? That just seeing kind of what things are still counted as scandalous, I think can be an interesting marker of kind of what is also normal, to look at it in contrast like that. And I think that it was funny when Emily was bringing up that thing of, she's like, no, I don't think people think it's weird that we would have this, we're exes, but we're still very close. And Dedeker and I were both like, no, people think that's super weird. that it just depends kind of what you see and what people say to you. But I do think that even if we're going from that place, like Dedeker said, where it's like being able to have other options than just getting married and having kids and living together, that those things are not quite like, there's less fear, I think, of being sort of the old maid of like, oh, well, your life has no meaning if you don't do those things. I think that's...
Yeah. My goal in life is to be a crotchety old bitch. So
Perfect.
Simply by continuing to exist, I'm achieving my goal. But yeah.
Exactly, yeah. That I think that stigma is definitely less amongst my peers. That there's... It's still there, though. And I think that definitely there's still an assumption of monogamy, and there's still an assumption that your romantic partner is going to be more important to you than any of your friends or, you know, anything like that, except for like maybe your kids and maybe your parents. But I think it's like we're a step enough that direction that then for people who are outside of that, doing things like polyamory or just not cohabiting while they're in a monogamous relationship, it's like less of a jump. So it's still outside of the normal, but it doesn't feel quite so far away. So I won't, that's kind of, I guess, what I'd like to offer is just that maybe we're looking too far ahead to see where the difference is, and it's actually more just that that's not as big a jump away from what's normal as it used to be.
Yeah, well, all social norms are always an evolution. They've changed very, very much over the centuries. But speaking to you from the future, I am your future. You realize this. One thing that not a lot of people I've found who talk about unconventional relationship choices who are in their 20s and 30s think about is the long-term implications of what that means for the infrastructure of your life as you age. If you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s and are not married and have never combined the infrastructure of your life with somebody, and especially if you don't have children, wow, if you end up ill or disabled or otherwise unable to care for yourself, you are fucked. Unless you are extremely wealthy. This society is really set up to support a lot of people who where it's assumed that you will have a life partner and all the joined infrastructure that goes along with that. And that has actually inhibited the adoption of infrastructure, at least in the United States and in many other countries, that would accord support and assistance to individuals.
Right.
You use the rationale that you're coupled up, so your partner's going to take care of you, right? Well, not necessarily so. This is something that I think about very much. I've chosen to not, entwine the infrastructure of my life with my partners. And I'm like, what's that going to look like when I'm in my 70s or 80s? Unless some significant things change about the social and political and financial landscape in this country, I'm not looking forward to that. That's going to suck. Yeah. So you guys got to make it all better for me, all right?
All right, we're on it.
Because then you'll be making it better for you, too. But couple centrism has crippled the development of a lot of social infrastructure in this country.
My mom has been single for 20 years and really doesn't operate under the assumption that she needs a mate. I am an only child, so I get that perhaps that burden would fall on me, but it's so not been in our daily talk about what the future holds and stuff. I mean, my grandmother died and she was totally fine, 100%, very functioning directly before that. So maybe I'm coming at it with that mindset, but it is an interesting idea, how how okay can you be 100% by yourself without anyone else until you're not. And obviously not everyone has that luxury because of finances or because of health or whatever. So it is something to think about. I don't know, but I feel as though I see the rise of mothers and of families being single-parented, and so that is just a norm more, perhaps, than it once was. So I don't know what that means. I hope.
Well, it's a social norm, But the infrastructure has not caught up with that. For instance, say if my dear friend Emily and I, not you, Emily, different Emily, say we wanted to eventually buy a house together. Because we consider each other to be core partners to each other, and what if we wanted to do that? If we weren't married, it would be almost impossible for us to get a mortgage. Together, unless we formed an LLC and bought the house through an LLC, and that would be an entirely different tax landscape for that.
Right.
Thankfully, the three of us have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not for like home buying purposes. Not for,
I know, but just in case.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot harder to qualify for a mortgage if you are, if you aren't a very wealthy person, if you aren't married. If you are married, you automatically get better consideration. You're considered a better lending risk. And that's ironic because I love my former spouse dearly, but oh my goodness, the way he managed money. But we qualified for a mortgage like that largely because we were married. And it didn't take into consideration his spending habits versus mine.
Yeah, well, and this also shows up in health insurance premiums. It kind of changed with Obamacare, but is probably heading back this direction. But huge difference in terms of the statistical health risks associated with not being married doesn't take into account whether you're not married by choice rather than just that you couldn't or that you did wrap everything up in that one relationship that then ended, or there's different ways it can look, and the statistics don't take any of that into consideration when calculating healthcare premiums and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not trying to turn this all into massive economic commentary, but just to say that the things that make up the relationship escalator, they affect every aspect of life in society, and they have stunning consequences. And I mean, for instance, I personally know several people who have gotten married or stayed in marriages that they would have rather left because of the health insurance. Or because of the housing.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely something to be aware of in the coming years for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Not only those of us who are currently practicing solo polyamory, but also our children and et cetera, if those are going to happen in our lives. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's its own social and economic issue, but it does come down to a lot of the underpinning of that is that we're assumed that an escalator relationship will provide intrinsic infrastructure for people.
Yes.
Ain't necessarily so, and that certainly varies by race, by country, by other demographics too. Not a level playing field, but we still make a lot of those assumptions. And it's not just you and me making those assumptions. It's the actuaries at insurance companies, and it's legislators and hospital administrators and all sorts of people. Yeah. Yeah, you weren't expecting that can of worms, were you?
No, thank you for sharing all that.
I really appreciate you bringing that up because it is such a huge intrinsic part of how we function in the States. The fact that so much of our infrastructure honestly still kind of does harken back to this time, when, for instance, specifically as a woman, your only way of having any kind of stability was to get a husband, where like the nuclear family unit was held up as the only infrastructure that you can really have in your life. And even though we like to believe that we are so progressive now, like that's just the fact that the systems that we have to live with and work with are still very much based in that. So no, it's a very important thing for people to think about and to acknowledge at the very least.
And there has been a lot of progress, and there's good. And here's the thing: when I tell people that I write about unconventional relationships, a lot of times they think I'm talking about same-sex marriage. It's like, well, actually, that's kind of all about jumping on the escalator, but
just scratching the surface. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does matter though, because the thing is, okay, if you're going to have basically institutionalized couple privilege, at least don't make it discriminatory based on sexual orientation. Yeah. But legal marriage is, in fact, institutionalized couple privilege.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm not saying legal marriage is necessarily a bad thing. I just wish that other people were not excluded from the benefits that are only approachable through legal marriage.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit again.
Okay.
This is something that the three of us have talked about to various people that we've interviewed recently, and just on our own. We have kind of created ourselves a support group within our community, our Patreon community. But support groups are a big thing for all of us who do non-traditional relationships. It's incredibly important. But we wanted to ask kind of what are some of the best support networks out there that you've found, and what makes them so great, what makes them so positive, and what are things that can make support networks better and stronger. We wanted to talk about inclusivity as well, because that is a big thing. I think that's super important. Not just that like your support group looks super homogenous and that it's all the same person over and over again, but that it includes a lot of different types of people within that support group. How important is that? Because I know we think it is very important.
It's huge because, like I said, it's really difficult to undo all the social conditioning that goes along with the relationship escalator. And it's not just for people who are polyamorous, for people who prefer to solohood, or who are asexual or aromantic, or other ways of stepping off the escalator. It's kind of scary to think that you're the only one doing this, and that means you must be doing it wrong, right? It just triggers all sorts of insecurities, because these relationships are where we are most emotionally vulnerable, and it always helps to see other people who have done it. I grew up before the internet happened, and I remember what it was like to only really be able to connect with people that I could meet with, and it was that was very, very limiting. Plus, it was New Jersey in the 1980s. Wake me up when Reagan is no longer president, please. And but the people that I did have in my life before the internet happened, who we clicked with on a variety of levels and could have very open and frank conversations, even if we were very different, that helped a lot. One thing that I learned from my father that I've never forgotten is if you only talk to people who think just like you won't learn a damn thing. So I've always tried to reach out. So I think it helps to have friends who represent a variety of perspectives, demographics, and to be a good friend to them, and to realize that you are going to have differences and see things differently, and that's okay. Takes a lot of the fear out of difference. But also the internet is a wonderful thing, because when I first decided, back in the, around 2000 or so, can I just admit that this monogamy thing doesn't work for me? And I'd already been married for about a decade at that point, and it's like, not really working. There was this thing called Alta Vista. Do you remember Alta Vista?
I do.
Pre-Google.
Oh gosh, I do.
Jase is a little
remember Alta
older
Vista.
than the two of us.
Yeah, I did a lot of complicated search queries in Alta Vista, and then suddenly I saw this word polyamory. I'm like, what's that? And a word is a powerful thing. When anybody sees a word that they don't understand, it typically means that that's something they can Google now. And it's a lot easier than it used to be. And you can instantly start to find resources. They won't necessarily all be good resources, but at least it's a starting point for research and a conversation. So I tend to think that a combination of cultivating personal friendships and online community and local poly groups are great. I can't emphasize how grateful I am for the Boulder Polyamory Meetup, which my friend Jase Glasscock organizes. You guys, if you want to understand what makes a good poly group, you should talk to Jase. She's been doing this for about 10 years, and it's weekly, and it's packed every week. Because for people who are regulars, and for people who are just curious, because it's a good place to have the discussion, and she has a good blend of structuring the discussion and having free and open communication. So those elements, personal friendships, local community, and finding online community, I think are all essential. But especially in polyamory, don't just approach community as a dating pool. That's the mistake that a lot of people make. You want to have poly acquaintances and friends and mentors so that you can observe their experience and learn from it. Too often people just think, well, I want to meet poly people so I can have people to date. That's generally the wrong way to go about it.
Right.
And in fact, there's several people come to the Boulder Poly meetup who aren't poly, who might be swingers or they might be monogamous, but they just enjoy having this level of conversations about relationships that they don't often get to have in person in a lot of other places. So, yeah, and also, too, it helps for a lot of reasons to be out about being poly. Being poly in particular, I've found, for several reasons. The whole reason why same-sex marriage came about is because a lot of people were brave enough to say, yeah, I'm gay, and no big deal. And the more people knew people who were gay, the less weird it became. And that built political support eventually for same-sex marriage by normalizing it. But also, on a personal level, that normalization means that your friends can support you through relationship issues, even if they might not necessarily be polyamorous themselves, because they won't be automatically prejudiced against anything except monogamy. Growing up, that was not the case for me. Hopefully that will be more the case for you because people have at least generally heard the word and know that it's a valid option.
Yeah. I definitely feel like that is something that I at least notice in my own life is that I do think compared to other generations that I have more of a wealth of friends around me who maybe they themselves identify more monogamously, but they're still able to be supportive, even just in the very simple way of just being willing to ask about all of my partners, not just one particular person or things like that. And I think, again, as we already said, so hard to be able to like get a true, litmus test of people outside our own little bubble. But I do like to think that at least in our generation that we have more access to that for sure, of people who are at least, like you said, know the term, aren't automatically scared off by it, don't automatically make it about themselves as like a threatening thing to themselves, and can just be there and be supportive.
Yeah, and are comfortable with you in social situations. That matters a lot too. Like I said, the social norms they're kind of the Velcro, so people know how to interact with each other, and all these little hooks that you can grab into, and that universe of hooks is expanding for a lot of people. Their comfort zone has gotten broader, and I'm really happy with that.
So, Amy, can you tell our listeners where they can find more of your stuff? And also, please tell us about the special discount that you have for Multiamory listeners specifically.
Yeah, okay, so Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator, you can find out all the information at offescalator.com. And it's available as on Amazon as a print book and as an ebook, but if you want to get the really cool version, buy it through offescalator.com. First of all, because I can do things like cool special discounts there that I can't really do on Amazon. And second, because I'll send you a signed copy, and how cool is that? So the discount is go to offescalator.com, and when you purchase the book, use the discount code Multiamory, and you will get a 20% discount off of that for a signed copy mailed to you personally that may or may not have fur from a black cat on it.
Consider it a bonus, I guess. Absolutely. Unless you're allergic.
Yeah, if you're allergic, you might want to send me a note about that. I'll make sure I pull it out of that box.
No wasabi.
And also that, like I said, this is the first in a series of books. I meant to have at least the second book out right now, but, life. But the second book that I'm in the process of finishing now is called How Does That Work? And it's answers to 12 common questions that people get about unconventional relationships. And again, it's based on the research I've done previously, plus some additional surveys that I'm doing now. For most of those questions in that book, I'm going to be doing on offescalator.com some short surveys to gather some additional and updated information, since my original information is about 4 years old now. And then after that is Off the Escalator in the Closet, which is how people navigate decisions about being out or in the closet about their relationships, and how to make the world a friendlier and safer place for all kinds of relationships.
Great, excellent. Well, that's so exciting. It's so exciting that you have all these projects coming down the line, and I'm definitely excited to see what you'll have next. I'm sure when your next books come out, we'll probably have you back on the show.
Sure.
So our listeners can look forward to that. I feel like I learned a lot today, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
Oh, well, thank you for being my 20 and 30 something focus group here. I appreciate it.
Well, you know what? There's only one of us who's still in their 20s for about another week or so, actually.
My birthday's next week.
Rock
oh,
on.
dear God. And then 30, here I come. Yikes.
Oh, that's right. It just keeps getting better. And listen, as soon as you hit 40, you officially get to not give a fuck anymore.
Oh, I thought I got that at 30.
No, you don't even
once
know
I turned 30,
yet.
I was operating this whole time thinking that I didn't get to give a fuck.
No, you don't even know
it's
yet. Just hang on.
Awesome.
Yeah, well,
Just more
thank
to
you.
look forward to, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right. Well,
Thank you so much,
thanks very
Amy.
much for having me here. I really appreciate your work. And Dedeker, you did a great job with your book. Well done.
Oh, geez. Oh, gosh. Oh, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting the compliments. Oh, I don't even know how to take it. Gosh, thank you.
Well, thank you so much
great.
to Amy. Yeah, that was awesome. I feel like I learned a lot. I mean, I think all of us did. She's also just really cool to
Definitely.
hear her talk about all this stuff. She has so much experience writing about it and talking to people about it and interviewing people about it that really shows in just how easily she can talk about it. If you out there have any questions or comments that you would like played on our show in the future, you can call us at 678-MULTI-05 and leave us a voicemail there, or you can send us an audio message at the Multiamory Facebook page. You can also email us at info@multiamory.com or send us a message on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. To support our show and join our private Facebook community, go to patreon.com/multiamory. Multiamory is created and produced by Dedeker Winston, Emily Matlack, and me, Jase Lindgren. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.
Hey, this is Dan Savage from the Savage Lovecast and Savage Love. You're listening to a Swing Set podcast at Swing Set FM.